Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. We are very excited for our very special guest today. We've been really wanting to dig into what this looks like, what high quality instructional materials look like in different settings than just like your general public education school in a school that is a little bit special. And I think the KIPP schools are really special schools all across the country. And so we have a very special guest to help us do that. We have Daisy Salazar-Garza, and she is going to be, do you say principal? Do you say leader of KIPP SOCAL? School leader of KIPP SOCAL. So welcome, Daisy.
Welcome, Daisy.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to talk to you because your school hasn't even opened yet, right? So you're in a really unique spot where you get to do so much thoughtful planning for opening a school. So I'm excited to hear what that planning looks like.
Definitely. Yeah, it's been nice considering I've been a school leader before at a school that's fully grown. It's a nice opportunity to have the ability to have a break and kind of think about like what does education look like at this time?
Yeah.
How to reimagine it and have conversations with parents and about what their desires are for education in a school. So it's been awesome.
Sure.
That's awesome. So you've been spending a lot of time choosing curriculum and considering rigor and doing all of the prep work to get school going. So you are starting, if I'm correct, your school will open 2021, 2022. So this coming school year, correct?
Yes, we're opening in August with TK and K.
That's exciting. So will you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you chose Wit Wisdom? I'll put it out there so everybody knows you chose Wit Wisdom. How you chose Wit Wisdom and why you chose Wit Wisdom.
Yeah, so I'm actually from Los Angeles, California, born and raised. Both of my parents are Mexican immigrants. And I think through my own educational experience, I definitely saw a lot of inequities that I experienced myself. One of the first people in my family is to go to college, which really motivated me to do more for my community and more for students who look like me, to make sure that they have a really excellent education. So I actually taught in Philadelphia public schools. I'm
from Philadelphia.
As a second grade bilingual teacher. And, I did as a teacher do a lot of like social justice topics and early on in my career because I felt it was really important for kids to have those conversations. And also kids are just so very like curious and like they observe a lot and they have a lot of things that they're thinking about and that they know already.
Yes.
Without us really like having those conversations, right? We don't really get to hear their thoughts and their opinions and what they have to face in their communities. And so, I even had with my second grade class, like we had a community walk, we pen paled with other schools in, urban, more like suburban areas and compared kind of like our school versus like a school in a suburban area and really talked about those inequities and why those were happening. And so I'm really a lot about like making sure that kids have like lots of rich discussion, that they have the ability to build on their ideas and push each other, because I feel like that really invests kids in their learning and propels them to see the world in a different way. And so I actually, someone recommended that I see a KIPP school. So I went to a KIPP school in Philadelphia and just fell in love with the culture, like the way that all people in the school building just had this really great passion for education and like-mindedness of we are doing everything we can for our kids and our families. And I wanted to be a part of that. And so KIPP Philly recommended me to KIPP NYC, and I ended up applying there and was a part of the founding team for first grade at KIPP Infinity Elementary School. where I was also a teacher and a leader and the school leader eventually of the school. At KIPP Infinity, we used Wheatley, which some people might know or might not know is kind of like was kind of like Great Minds and Wit and Wisdom, but then it departed and Wit and Wisdom was created. And there's a lot of things that I enjoyed about Wheatley, and there's things that were missing. And I think when I came to KIPP SOCAL, I was talking to our academic team, and they had mentioned Wit and Wisdom. And at the middle school I was at, I actually did the 6th grade curriculum and really enjoyed it, and thought it was a really great experience for kids. And they were just having lots of rich discussions about literature and were invested in the units. And so that really, having to, teach the curriculum myself, as I was coaching a teacher and, supporting her in the implementation of the curriculum, really like interested me in seeing like the early grades, particularly because I am an elementary school teacher, and I was an elementary leader as well and a principal. And so it was great to kind of go back into the units and see Wit and Wisdom, and do some of the PDs. And I really want to, it felt like the curriculum itself really allows kids to like learn about the world, have deep discussions, like not only like learn about reading, right, and become like invested in reading, but like invested in the world, right, invested in like having conversations, and even just the structure of like having kids notice and wonder, right, and think about like what is my relationship to this book, and how am I thinking about this book in my own life and the way that I perceive it, and then building students' understanding and the rigor with it, I thought was like amazing, which is why I selected this curriculum to be part of my founding school.
That's exciting. I'm thinking one of the questions that you mentioned in our pre-call is how can we make this relevant for our kids? And I think that that's really important, and that question to me stuck out and also stands out as you share right now your kind of story, your narrative about why you chose Wit and Wisdom and how that came to be. I'm curious because I know that you mentioned the noticing and wonder, so the actual structures that we use to teach kids how to access text, but is there anything in particular in the texts, in the topics, in the tasks that stand out as relevant for kids in terms of, I want to leave it really broad for you, but I'm thinking like in terms of like curiosity or anti-bias or racist, the things that I know that KIPP is really passionate about.
Yeah, I think that the great things about the curriculum, right, is that it's like iterative of like let's go back to a book, which allows a lot of ability to kind of look at the layering of reading, right, and like putting in kind of like complicating the reading of like what does this actually mean. And so one of the great things that I really enjoyed about the curriculum was how it allowed me as a school leader to infuse my ideas about anti-racist and anti-bias education. Particularly, right, like when approaching the curriculum, like I internalized it as is, used the protocols that were provided by the curriculum itself, and then thought to myself, like, how do we complicate the curriculum by thinking about issues of equity and identity. And so, I think that the themes of the units are topics that kids are interested in. And so for an example is like in kindergarten, like our 5 senses, like that's how they explore the world, right? Through their senses. And there's like a lot of relationship, right? Of like, yeah, that feels icky, or like that smells gross. Like, like that's just like kindergartners, like, yeah, that's like how I use my senses all the time.
That's basically the entire way they explore the world.
That's right.
And so I think like taking that, right, and then like talking about like, well, how do our senses help us navigate the world, right? And then another layer I took with approaching the curriculum was thinking about like their own kind of like, what do the curriculum itself, the books, right? And looking at the books, a lot of it promotes like ableism, which is like all people who use all of their senses, right? And so I thought in my head, like if we're thinking about identities and we're thinking about bias, right? And equity, like how do we complicate that for kids where they're thinking about maybe people who don't have their sense of sight or their sense of hearing, and ask them like how would we navigate the world if that was what we had to go through, and really understanding that so that they don't see that our world is full of like, you know, able-bodied people that don't, you know, have experienced any of these disabilities, but really thinking about the world and like people are different and we experience the world differently, and how do I understand that experience, and really like ask questions about it so that I have an awareness and an understanding that helps me be a better human being.
That's awesome. Daisy, can you back up for us a little bit? I just want to, for our audience's sake, talk a little bit about like your school is going to actually have a focus on anti-bias, anti-racist education. Is that right?
Yeah, so our school, the name of the school is KIPP Public School, and we're founding in the Montebello Unified School District. And one of the like guiding principles, like we have 4 guiding principles at our school. One of it is like who we are matters. So like our identities and our histories and who we are is important. And another guiding principle is being inclusive matters. So anti-racist and anti-bias education are important. And thinking about identities that are similar to ours and different from ours are important for us to understand, one, like other people's experiences, but also like how our world is set up. Our other 2 guiding principles are community matters and relationships matters. And that's more of like how we see learning and growth, right, happening in a community of learners together, not only the students, but also families, right, and staff members, and having the ability for us as individuals, as a part of a larger community of the school, to examine our own identities and our own biases, right? What we experience at home, and how do we form that connection between what our children see at home and what they're experiencing at home and the knowledge they have, and bringing that to our school so that they see the relevance of what they're learning and are creating connections between that.
It's amazing. One of the things that to just kind of connect what you mentioned before to what you just said now. So about the, for example, that ableist perspective to what you mentioned and giving the framing for your school so eloquently, I'm thinking about students accessing those different perspectives and doing so because they have built such a strong content knowledge base through the curriculum to be able then to think outside of what their own self is, and then also thinking about that knowledge base that they've built through the curriculum, that then they're able to see the other perspectives because of that. Like it's really, really hard, I think, to see other perspectives when you only have your own perspective without the knowledge behind it to give you that like 360 view. I feel like what you're saying is almost like supporting building like a volume of reading for students to really broaden their perspective even more so than we do in the curriculum. Is that like an accurate kind of idea to grab at?
Yeah, I think like knowledge building is very important. I think also like tapping into our students' own sense of like knowledge that they experience in their world is also important. And I think, yes, like the volume of reading and like exposing children to various like texts has students make those like connections, but also formulate questions and really interrogate and inquire the world, which is super important for them to have, not just like as students, but like as people in the world.
Yeah. You had mentioned one of your guiding principles is community. And so I'm wondering how you support students to learn from the world, to learn from people around them. Like how do you do that? How do you help them learn from their community? I'm just curious because I think KIPP is, I've heard it's very special. If anyone listening wants to take me on a KIPP tour, I'm game because I haven't been in a KIPP school yet. But I've heard it's wonderful. And I'm just curious how you are thinking that you'll make those connections to the community.
Yeah, I think like even right now, right, I don't have school hasn't opened yet, right? So I don't have like a building. We're working on that, but I'm talking to families now that are enrolling and having sessions with them, to discuss topics that interest them, but also, provide information and have conversations about what their experiences are and what knowledge and interest their children have and how we're bringing that into our school. Something we do a lot at KIPP that we really believe in is like having home visits. And so at my school, what I've structured is having a welcome visit where myself and my founding team right now, which is my operations team, we're all going to do welcome visits where the focus is on our value of pride. And it's our value of pride is like being proud of who we are and who we're going to become. And really like asking our parents and our families in those visits, like, what are you most proud of? Like, what are celebrations you have at home? What are things that you value in your family that you enjoy? And taking and listening and taking notes of that so that we're able to include that in our school, right? And those celebrations and the things that they value, that we're able to represent that in our school building, in our planning over the summer with our teachers that are going to be starting. All of that is intentional, right? And then even having our teachers do their home visits, right? And having them do, the focus is wisdom. So like, the power of experience and storytelling, having our teachers ask our parents, like, what are things like stories that you love and enjoy in your family? What are things that you appreciate in your family that we can include in our teaching? And so that's something that we have at our school, but also KIPP in general. We really like are very big on home visits and getting to meet and know our families. As a teacher and as a school leader at KIPP, I still have the kids remember that, like the first day of school, they're nervous, right? And they're like, oh my God, I don't know anyone at this school, right? This is a new school. But then they'll see you, in a crowd of people and be like, oh, like Miss Salazar-Garza, you did my home visit. You came to my house. Like, and you can have that, conversation with them of like, I'm so happy you're here. I know you're a little nervous, but you're going to do great. And like, it was so great to be at home with your family and get to see you and your family at home and learn from you. And I think that sticks with kids, right? And it sticks with us too. And having done lots of home visits over the years, like there's so many families and students that I've met that like, they remember that, I remember that. And that's something that, that really shows our families that like, we're here to partner with you. Like you are an asset to our school and our network. And we want to get to know you. And like, thank you so much for like enrolling your child at our school, because that's a promise that is sacred for us. And that's something that I always thought was such an amazing part of every year, is having that experience as a staff member to do home visits with our families.
So great to hear, Daisy. I have something totally different on my mind, so I'm sorry if I'm going to like take you in a different direction. Lori, did you want to keep talking about that question? Because I don't want to.
No. I think it's really special that you all do that. And I used to do home calls when I, was a teacher. I would call a different family and then make it my beeswax to call them every day, make a call every day on my way home, but not a visit. And so I'm thinking, if I could go back and be a teacher again, I would do a visit. So no, take us in a different direction, Melissa.
Right,
I was just like sharing my inner narrative on this beautiful afternoon as Daisy was sharing that with us.
So I have to, Daisy, you already like gave your example of that kindergarten module and how you might bring in the texts with, people who can't see, right? As opposed to the books that are about, people that can see. And since we talked the first time, like I literally it blew my mind that example that you brought up. And I've been thinking about it since. And so my question is, I'm wondering how you got to that place. Like, how did you, go through the curriculum and get there? And I'm going to add another question on, how are you going to support your teachers too? Because I think hearing that, you could easily this is because I think it's kind of a gut instinct for teachers is to like, I have a curriculum and now I'm going to like tear it apart and like take, like find all the bad things about it. Lori and I did it the first time we looked at Wit and Wisdom, and then we learned our lesson.
We learned very quickly within 12 minutes. We were like, you can't do this.
But the way I heard you talk about it is like, there is such great stuff in there. There's a lot of rigor. We're not trying to take out what's there, but we're trying to like extend and add on. So I'm just wondering how you did that, and then how you plan to guide your teachers through that once you have a staff.
Yeah, I think like the curriculum is like really well organized, and like it's purposeful, right? And it's rigorous. So I think, having myself, what I did was like go through the actual like protocols that Wit Wisdom has for like internalization. For like the module, the unit, and like the lesson arcs and each lesson, right? Doing that work myself, and then thinking about like what is already there in the curriculum, and like and thinking through like a critical literacy lens of, an anti-racist lens, what are things that are missing that need to be present. And so what I added to the internalization protocols was more guiding questions for teachers, which were questions that I asked myself internally in my head, but I had to like think, like, what was the thing that I asked myself, and how do I make this like transferable for a teacher to do?
Yeah.
And so there's like 2 sections in the internalization that I added. Everything else is the same from Wit and Wisdom. I just added was like, one was like a component where we're learning from the community. So what aspects of what is presented already in the curriculum affirm or align or connect with what our families are bringing, right? What their knowledge base, who they are. And then the question of like, what are things that are missing, that are not present? And then how do we like purposely plan that out, right? So like in a unit, thinking of how do we plan that out in a purposeful way throughout the unit, in a way that doesn't disrupt like the curriculum, but like adds an enhancement to it. And then the second aspect of like questioning I had, it was more of like the liberatory approach to of like reading, which is this anti-racist, anti-bias perspective, which is like what perspectives like in the curriculum support, white supremacy or white normative culture, and what are things that are maybe perspectives that are marginalized, that are not present, and then how do we plan for that in a proactive way? And so that allows us to really ensure that like we're thinking about it in an intentional way, and in a way that like enhances what's already in the curriculum. And so that's the approach that I took to kind of think about like, how do we put that in action? And they're the same questions for the unit. They're the same questions for like the lesson arc, same questions for the lesson study, right? All the protocols have the same questions, so that as a teacher, I'm consistently asking myself these questions so that I'm always thinking about things in a different perspective, in a different light, and thinking about like, how am I planning that? And in our school, we're going to do a lot of like content meetings where we do it like together as a team. Like before we launch a unit, we're going to like internalize the unit together and plan it together, and leverage each other, because that's really important. So I think like that speaks to like the aspect of like internalization, and like how to make it a structure and system, in the school that's manageable for teachers. And then when I think about like development, right, I'm thinking about how do I, as a school leader, develop my teachers to understand these concepts of anti-racist and anti-bias education. So talking to them about what critical literacy is, talking to them about like, what does intersectionality of identities, what does that mean, right? And having them do that work in the summer before we even talk about curriculum, like have them apply that to themselves, like as people, and examining their own identities. That allows them to then be able, just like in the curriculum, right? You focus on yourself, and then you start applying it to the outside world, right? Like, how do I then apply that to something like Wit and Wisdom, right? Because they've done the work for, like, in my perspective, with my identity. And so that's kind of like my vision or my plan for how I plan to really like onboard my staff and ensure that like they have the ability to be successful with doing the work. And I myself have done the internalization of all of the units to make sure that like I'm prepared to support my teachers as they're doing that work themselves, right? So that I'm, prepared ahead of time to make sure that I can look and think about like what misconceptions they might have, what difficulties they might have, so that I can prepare that myself to help them navigate that and teach them how to best approach it.
So incredibly thoughtful and strategic.
I know. I'm like, can I move to California and teach at your school?
I just think, for those listening, right? For those listening, like, I just want to name that you're really supporting teachers. You're being insanely supportive by doing the work side by side with them, by being able to say, I've done these protocols. I did them. Yeah. Let's do them together and take them through each one. And then also let's ask these critical questions that help us extend and enhance the knowledge and the learning of our students in front of us. I think that those questions are, yeah, I can't remember if you said this or if I said this or what, but they're demonstrating that critical consciousness, and they're helping teachers to take the curriculum at hand and then utilize their knowledge of their students and like find that sweet spot of how do I support the students in front of me? And you're modeling that really strongly by doing that for, your staff, with supporting them through the internalization of the curriculum. So I just want to say that's incredibly supportive and really intense and hard work. And it's time consuming. It's thought provoking. It's challenging in a lot of ways. So thank you for that work.
Of course. I mean, I'm happy. I think for me, like at the heart, I'm like a teacher. I love teaching. And I think for me, I like to do the work so that I can kind of see, like, experience it from the lens of a student and a teacher, and like how can we make sure that we meet the needs of everyone, right? So that they feel successful, because that's the thing, like we want everyone to feel, like teachers to feel successful and students to feel successful in their learning. And as a school leader, I take that responsibility like really like I to heart, right? It's like if my team or my students aren't feeling successful, it's my role to figure out what I can do to make sure that they feel developed, and they feel like they're being successful in their learning. And so this is part of the process for me, is like I'm always that person that like I need to do things in order to know like how to best like approach things. And so I appreciate you saying that, naming that.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how you plan to execute this with teachers. Like, it's hard work. I know you mentioned that you're going to start ahead of time, which is very good plan, starting in the summer. But other than that, like, how are you envisioning this occurring throughout the year? Obviously, it's going to be ongoing, because I can tell by the way that you were talking in our pre-call, but I'll hand it to you. How do you envision this rolling out with teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like going through like, what does internalization of content look like? Going through like the Wit Wisdom itself, and like, what are the components of it? Why, right? Like the implementation guide, digging deep into that before we even like do the internalization. And then I would say like, doing the internalization processes together over the summer so that everyone's familiar and like is getting kind of like experience with it. And in my experience, just in having, done Wheatley before, right, what we always used to have is just weekly content meetings where we met as a team and normed and talked about the curriculum, talked about the books, and like practiced, the questions we asked, for example, or practice things that, we're struggling with. And, as a school leader, my role really is, the first year is really just implementation. And so it's really like observing my teachers on a weekly basis to see like how implementation is going, what are some trends that I'm noticing, on like a basis of like, I'm observing, all of kindergarten. What are some trends I'm noticing? And then like, how do I incorporate that in my weekly planning of my content meetings? So that when I'm facilitating it, right, I'm naming for my team, like, pacing seems to be an issue. I'm noticing that across our classrooms. Here's some strategies that we're going to use to really like, make sure that our pacing is on point and that we're getting through all portions of the curriculum. here's some goals that we're all going to work to collectively, and let's do the internalization and practice, right? And then, monitor that and celebrate my team when they do make, pacing happen and everything's, going well and we're meeting our goals. And then thinking about thinking about our teachers and the development, right? Not all teachers are also in the same area of development, right? Everyone's different. And so thinking about if there's a teacher who might need more time with internalization, spending the time in my one-on-one meetings with them on a weekly basis to actually do the internalization work with them. So I think when I view about support, right, support has to be ongoing, and it has to be in partnership and always a dialogue of a conversation, right? Having been a teacher myself, things are not as easy as they appear, right? It's not as do 1, 2, and 3 and you're good, right? It's complicated, right? And I think that's the beautiful part of teaching, right? Is every year you get different kids, and that makes you a better teacher. That just makes you a really awesome teacher when you get different cohorts of kids and you get to think about your teaching in a different way. And so part of that process is supporting my teachers in that, right? So that they don't feel alone. So that they feel that they have someone to be a thought partner with. And my experience as a school leader, I've always had teachers who are hey, Daisy, here's this exit ticket I just did with my kids. And they really didn't do well with this. Can we talk about it? Yes. Bring it for our weekly meeting and let's talk about it. And those are just kind of the open conversations I have with my staff of let's dig into it. That's awesome. I'm always open to hearing from my staff what issues they're having so that we can problem solve it, and so that we can all get better.
That's awesome. I love it when school leaders are also really good thought partners. And the fact that you just said that your staff is willing to bring things that exit tickets that didn't go so well, that's the true testament of you're an amazing school leader. Because I always think back, I'm who are the school leaders who I would have brought things like that to? I'm the ones who I felt really comfortable with, right? So you're just going to create an incredible environment. Will you send us some pictures or even when you open? Just be in contact with us. We'd love to hear about how it's going.
Totally. Videos, everything. I'll send
Yeah, send them along. Well, hopefully we'll have a more advanced website by then. Be able to post something for you.
I'm so curious about, I've been thinking this whole time, about Baltimore, right? And how the approach you're taking, as a school district with, how many schools are there, Lori? I don't even know, 200? A lot. We wouldn't be able to do what you're doing as a district, because the questions that you asked and I'm going to get this wrong, what the exact question was, Daisy, but it was it's basically about the students who are there in front of you, right? And seeing their identity. And that's different at each one of our schools. And it wouldn't be possible really to do what you're doing at a district level, because the identity of the students is different wherever you go. And so
that's a really good point, Melissa.
I just think it's really powerful to hear you talk about the work has to be done at the school level, at the teacher level, and might even change from year to year, as you all get new students and you do more of these home visits and you see who is in your community and who isn't. So I don't even know what my question is, but you just made me really think through that, and I guess what my real question is behind it is how did you get to such a, I think your question is just really powerful, right? The questions that you were asking in that protocol, the ones that you added, because it's not, I think we see, I'm going to just be real frank here. We've seen some people who are just let's go through a checklist. How many white authors are there? How many Black authors are there? Right? We just go through a checklist and it's okay, we're good. We're good, or we're not good. And it's well, it doesn't even take into consideration the students who are in front of you or at this school versus this school. So just wondering how you got to that. Well, what's your reaction to everything I just babbled about?
I also want to note, before Daisy shares, I just want to note that it is in the very late afternoon here for Melissa and I on the East Coast, and Daisy is just fresh over on the West Coast. So Daisy sounds really amazing and just fabulously flawless. And Melissa and I have like worked all day.
But she's making me think really hard about things too.
It's so funny because I was like,
we're different.
You're good.
No, I get, no, totally, Melissa. I understand what you're saying. Like, it's like the approach, right? I think like in education, the approaches we've taken are very like superficial, right? And I think there's a couple, I think, reasons why. I think one is like, sometimes we focus, we tend to go superficial when we're uncomfortable, right? It's like, if something is a checklist or I can name things and it's easy for me to like decipher, it's more comfortable for me to do that, right? It's like, oh, it's easy. I can do that. But when it's like deep and like you have to think about yourself and you have to think about like your kids in a different way, and people might shy away from that, right? It's like makes them feel uncomfortable. It's like nothing they've ever had to do before. And I think like, if you think about like, we think about our kids, right? We want kids to be critical thinkers and to be like advocates and to like, we want all these things for them, but we also have to do that ourselves. Like, we are the models for our children, right? Like James Baldwin said, like, children look at us, right? It's like they imitate adults. And so we have to do that work. And that work is hard and it's not easy, but it has to be done so that our kids can benefit from that, right? And so that's really like, for me, I think a lot of my thinking of the questions, right, came from the work that I've done for myself when it comes to the way that I look at the world, like my understanding of race, identity, intersectionality. I'm a big reader. I read on my own a lot. And so even like just there's books from Vivian Maria Vasquez that talk about negotiating critical literacy with, early childhood, right? Young children, and like expanding my thinking and reading things and thinking about like, how does this either align or complicate what I'm thinking as an educator? And I think that's super important. And it benefits, everyone. And I think that it allows us to walk away from like less superficial conversations about race, which tends to happen a lot, and have more transformative conversations, which I think in our country right now, that's where we are right now, where, we're kind of done with the transactional, right? We're seeing patterns of injustice. And so we have to make a decision as a country, like, are we prepared to go into that transformational area where, we're going to have like really uncomfortable conversations with neighbors, with family members, right? With friends, but like, it has to happen. And it's the same thing we have to do in education. And I think sometimes what happens in systems is we place so much hopes and so much like demand on our kids, but we have to do that work too. Like, that's how our kids see us, as like, whoa, like, right. Those are the moments in my teaching that I've seen kids be like, wow, Miss Salazar, like, you're actually thinking about this too. And you're thinking about like yourself. And because I'm always learning, and I want to model that for my kids, right? Like, I'm always learning myself. And so I'm not asking you to do the same thing. I have to do that too.
Mm-hmm. You said in our pre-call, we can expand the way we think about things so there's a variance of perspective in the curriculum we see. So we are preparing students to be critical thinkers. I think that really encapsulates what you just said. Yeah, totally. What I also wrote down, because I loved everything that you said, I wrote, you said what's difficult is finding a rigorous curriculum that affirms students' identities, but there are ways to have both. It's not an either or, it's an and. So I'm curious about if you can elaborate on that at all. And if you want to share a little bit about the critical literacy books that you read to get you to that point. I went and I actually searched the author that you mentioned in the area of law, and I was just so pumped to learn about that. And you added to my learning by mentioning that.
Yeah, no, totally. I think like when we think sometimes, right, it's like, oh, we have to do something from scratch, right? And I think like the reality is like our world exists, and we have to think about it in complicated ways to think about innovative things and change it. And so when I think about Wit Wisdom, like it has great culturally relevant text, right? It's rigorous. It really looks at our kids as like thoughtful, critical thinkers and pushes them to have critical conversations with each other, right? And it's an empowering experience, right? When you get to hold a book yourself and like get to ask questions and learn from your friends, right? And have fun, but also examine the world, right? And learn stuff that maybe you might not know, or affirm things you already know. And so I think about like, it's not an or, right? It's an and. It's like, how do we then use what's there and really think about it in a different way? And so, something I mentioned in our pre-call was just like this, idea from like Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was like a legal scholar in the 80s, and she's amazing. And I just love her. I love reading her books and just hearing her. And she really coined the term intersectionality, right? And so this idea that there's simultaneous identities we have at the same time, and that leads to racism and prejudice, right? And so this idea of like, our society does promote ableism, for example, people who are able-bodied, but we don't look at the world in that way. And so we have to think about, I might be, a woman, but maybe I'm disabled too. And that also, really influences my experience in the world, and sometimes in not positive way, right? And so thinking about the world in that way, I think also has our kids understand the various perspectives, right, that exist, and the various identities that they hold too.
Yes.
And really thinking about themselves, but also other people, and seeing the ways that who they are and complicating that. I think what happens a lot in our world is we try to flatten that, right, and say, especially in large, like just in general schools, right? We demographically label our students, right? Like you're this, you're that, but there's like complexity with that. That is not just a label, right? It's like, oh, I have certain percentage of students who are Latino, but they can be from Ecuador, they can be from Mexico, and that's a whole totally different experience, right? It's a whole totally different perspective. And so it's like, how do we approach education in that way so that we're complicating the way that we're seeing ourselves and our kids and, the things that we do at school?
You just made me think of, this is a terrible story. I'm pretend it's not in Baltimore, it's anywhere. But we actually have had some people who called our office to talk about how some students were not placed as an English learner based on their last name, but they weren't actually an English learner because they were an English speaker. But there was an assumption made based on what their last name was that they were an English learner, and it just like oh my gosh, like I can't believe this is happening. So yeah, that's just one example of like you can't just put everyone in a box. And
it's easy, right? It's like, oh, I just did this, but like the implications for that, right? To have the family or the student be like, well, that's not who I am. And you just like labeled me, like that's problematic. Right. And so, but I think
very much so.
Again, sometimes it's comfortable for us to label and box people. But as educators, we have to think about the world in a different way. Or else our kids are going to do the same thing, and then,
that makes me think about what you said earlier though, Daisy. It's not only comfortable, it's easy. It's the checklist, right? Yeah. And that's where it's easy to stop there. I mean, I think about this moment all the time when, actually right before we started the podcast, I think this propelled me to start this moment propelled me to call Melissa and be like, we should do a podcast. I was doing an observation with a school leader and a district leader. And in that observation, I had the lesson plan in front of me and I'm looking, for this lesson, and the district leader is just checking boxes. And I was like, well, see, I know they're reading Blood on the River, but this is not the curriculum at all. Like they're supposed to be doing this and this and this. And it was a very uncomfortable conversation because of the power dynamic, but also because it's not as easy as checking a box. And I realized in that moment, like, this is really about shifting thoughts and like ingrained practice, and like the thought leadership that person has in leading a district has completely done a 180 since we adopted high quality materials and it's just totally different now, because it does require such intellectual preparation and so much deep knowledge of what you're teaching, the content that you're teaching, the students in front of you. And it was way more than just a checklist. And so by that assessment with the checklist, it was like, yay, thumbs up, the teacher's doing it. And I was like, no, I don't think so. The teacher needs a lot of help, and let's figure out how to do that. But it was really hard to have that conversation, because it was not comfortable. It was not easy. It was not linear. It was really messy. And sometimes I wish that I had liked math better than literacy, because math to me is a lot more like skills based and linear. I'm like, oh, this would be easy to point to it and say, this is not what this is the skill that we've missed, and that's why we're here. But it's not so easy in literacy. So it was so like not linear, and it was very messy. But that's what you made me think of.
Yeah, no, and totally. And I think like that, the dialogue, right? Just think of like if that person was open to the dialogue and you had a real conversation, and maybe it was like, maybe the teacher hadn't had support in internalization. So
Right.
think about how like, oh, so like, let's figure out a plan for that and solve it, so that the kids are getting a, excellent experience. But we kind of, shut those conversations down when we don't have a conversation, and we're just kind of like looking for things that we can check off instead of having the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's hard to have a conversation, especially because it's like, usually the school leader, and this is like, I think an old school mindset, that the school leader is like the expert and the person who knows the most in the building. And really the school leader is a side-by-side thought partner in, to me, in 2020, 2021, as we're really in more recent years. I think that we've kind of shifted that narrative for a school leader, and the school leader is a support person for you, and a helpful person to help you learn your content and learn your materials and help you learn more about your students. So I think all of the things that you're sharing on this podcast today will be so helpful for our listeners, and whether they're teachers or leaders or aspiring leaders or aspiring district leaders, or I think you gave so many incredible pieces of like just what you're doing, like, so tips, advice, all the good stuff. So we're excited. Do you want to leave our listeners with a final piece of advice? I know you gave a lot. You could pick one that you already said to highlight, or you might want to share a new one.
Yeah, I think that my whole push always is like, we're always learning, and it's always important for us to put ourselves in the shoes of others, to really understand everyone's experience, to make that experience so much better and transformational for our kids. And they deserve that. I think our kids deserve that. And that really takes us being uncomfortable. So I think like my message is just like, lean into being uncomfortable and lean into asking questions, so that you're able to grow and you're able to then develop so many other people, right? And that's so important. And that's really where change happens, right? Is when we lean into like something that's uncomfortable, something that's new to us, and we ask questions and we're curious, and we have an open dialogue that might be like not linear and not comfortable. We're able to learn so much more. And that really helps the younger generation, right? Understand that like, this is all, like, we can make things better, but it only happens when we open ourselves to that.
That is wonderful advice. Lori's clapping for you. So seriously, Daisy, when you start hiring at the upper grades, don't forget about me. But really, I mean, I'm just like, you're going to be an amazing school leader. You already have been a school leader, but especially for this school, you're going to just be amazing. And I am a little bit jealous of all the teachers that get to work with you.
Thank you.
You'll have to send us some pictures of student work, really. I mean, I just can't wait to see what your students are learning and doing, because your leadership efforts are just incredible. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, let's do a second podcast when you get your kindergartners.
Yes, definitely. You guys can follow me on my my Instagram. My school has an Instagram that I'm building right now. It's KIPP Public School. And I purposely, like, the things that I post are meant to show our families like what our guiding principles are and these ideas and concepts in action in our world today. And we do that. We highlight our kids too that are new to our school, but doing that work also, again, it's not just with teachers and with students, it's also with our families, right? Having those conversations with our families and building their understanding and understanding their own understanding and knowledge, right? And working through that is super important so that, a child's first teacher is their parent. And it's really important to partner with our parents so that they understand the work that we're doing and we can do it together.
Yeah. Can you really quickly not share. I'm going to write while you share aloud the Instagram. Can you just spell it out so people listening can follow?
Yeah, it's at KIPP Poder. So KIPP PODER public school.
Thank you. I'm like, can you write it down for us? I mean, just say it out loud.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy. It was great to talk to you, and we will be checking in with you throughout the year to hear how things go. Thank you
both for just having me and in your podcast, and I really enjoy listening to you guys and all the work that you're doing, and I love that both of you are like teachers at heart. It's like the most wonderful thing, and I'm happy to connect again and excited to continue this conversation.
Thank you. We appreciate you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.